Hi.
Welcome to Heavy Storytelling. How are you doing today? We are going to be reading a story, which is...
That was Ben-Hur. If you don't speak grunt.
But to do that, we are going to be doing the Bible.
The last chapter of the book of Judges. Are we ready for that one to be done?
Yes.
All right. There's been a lot of really...
it's brutal.
A lot of really, really heinous things have happened in the last few chapters. Cutting up the... was it the man that got cut up? It was a woman that got cut up, but it was after she was dead, but still, that's pretty gross. And then a civil war. So here we are. Judges chapter 21. This is the English Standard Version. Thank you, one person who has joined me already. I appreciate you. Now the men of Israel had sworn at Mizpah, no one of us shall give his daughter in marriage to Benjamin. And the people came to Bethel and sat there till evening before God. And they lifted up their voices and wept bitterly. And they said, O Lord, the God of Israel, why has this happened in Israel, that today there should be one tribe lacking in Israel? And the next day the people rose early and built there an altar and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. And the people of Israel said, which of all the tribes of Israel did not come up in the assembly to the Lord? For they had taken a great oath concerning him who did not come up to the Lord to Mizpah, saying, he shall surely be put to death. And the people of Israel had compassion for Benjamin their brother, and said, one tribe is cut off from Israel this day. What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since we have sworn by the Lord that we will not give them any of our daughters for wives? And they said, what one is there of the tribes of Israel that did not come up to the Lord to Mizpah? And behold, no one had come to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. For when the people were mustered, behold, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. So the congregation sent 12,000 of their bravest men there, and commanded them, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, also the women and the little ones. This is what you shall do. Every male and every woman that has lain with a male you shall devote to destruction. And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man by lying with him, and they brought him to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. Then the whole congregation sent word to the people of Benjamin, who were at the rock of Rimmon, and proclaimed peace to them. And Benjamin returned at that time, and they gave them the women whom they had saved alive of the women of Jabesh Gilead. But they were not enough for them, and the people had compassion on Benjamin, because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. Then the elders of the congregation said, what shall we do for wives for those who are left, since the women are destroyed out of Benjamin? And they said, there must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, that a tribe not be blotted out from Israel. Yet we cannot give them wives from our daughters, for the people of Israel had sworn, cursed be he who gives a wife to Benjamin. So they said, behold, there is the yearly feast of the Lord at Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, the south of Lebonah. And they commanded the people of Benjamin, saying, go and lie in ambush in the vineyards and watch. If the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in the dances, then come out of the vineyards and snatch each man his wife from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. And when their fathers or their brothers come to complain to us, we will say to them, grant them graciously to us, because we did not take for each man of them his wife in battle, neither did you give them to them, else you would now be guilty. And the people of Benjamin did so, and took their wives according to their number from the dancers whom they carried off. Then they went and returned to their inheritance, and rebuilt the towns, and lived in them. And the people of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his tribe and family, and they went out from there, every man to his inheritance. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Tomorrow we will begin with the first chapter of the book of Ruth. Judges and Ruth in the Hebrew text is included in one book. However, I think I've mentioned this before. Judges is the cyclical form of history, and Ruth is the progressive form of history. So Judges goes in circles, and if you notice, those circles go downward. It's like a downward spiral to destruction. And if they continued in this way, they probably would have, without God's protection, would have just imploded on themselves. But Ruth begins the progressive history of Israel, which is a beautiful narrative that we're going to begin tomorrow. So that is the end of the book of Judges, and I hope that you didn't enjoy it, because it's not really one of those books that you just enjoy. Now we've got Ben-Hur. Yesterday, of course, we read chapter 13 of book 4. And do we have a synopsis tonight? No synopsis tonight. So what happened? Yeah, come on. So what happened is Sheikh Ilderim is talking to Ben-Hur, and he recognizes that he's a Jew, and it talks about Jews not having chariots, because that's in the Bible, in the Old Testament. In the Torah, it says don't have chariots like the pagans or something. I can look that scripture up if you really want me to, but not while we're sitting here, because I'm not prepared right now. It was a thing, because the last verse in Judges is so sad. Yes, the last verse in Judges is so sad. I agree. The no chariot rule was a thing because God wanted the people of Israel to trust in Him. Of course, there's the famous verse in, is it Ezekiel, where it says, "Some trust in chariots, but I trust in the Lord your God." I don't know where anything is. I'm not good at finding things. That's what Google's for, unfortunately. But hi, Granny Bear. Yes, hi, Granny Bear from Mom. Anyway, so that he's talking about his horses and their bread, and he's got their lineage. Basically, they copied the idea of the lineage based on the genealogies from the Old Testament, and they decided to use that idea of a lineage with their horses, and these are the most royal horses in the world, and with the right driver, they can win any race, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so here we are, chapter 14, the Dowar in the Orchard of Palms. The first word is if. Oh, lots of thumbs up. Thank you for the lots of thumbs up. I appreciate that. That's great. Okay, so chapter 14, the first word is if, the Dowar in the Orchard of Palms. If the reader will return now to the repast of the wise men at their meeting in the desert, he will understand the preparations for the supper in Ilderim's tent. The differences were chiefly such as were incident to ampler means and better service. 3 rugs were spread on the carpet within the space so nearly enclosed by the divan. A table not more than a foot in height was brought and set within the same place, and covered with a cloth. Off to one side, a portable earthenware oven was established under the presidency of a woman whose duty it was to keep the company in bread, or, more precisely, in hot cakes of flour from the hand mills grinding with constant sound in a neighboring tent. Meanwhile, Balthasar was conducted to the divan, where Ilderim and Ben-Hur received him standing. A loose black gown covered his person, his step was feeble, and his whole movement slow and cautious, apparently depended upon a long staff and the arm of a servant. "Peace to you, my friend," said Ilderim respectfully. "Peace and welcome." The Egyptian raised his hand and replied, "And to thee, good sheik, to thee and thine, peace, and the blessing of the one God, God the true and loving." The manner was gentle and devout, and impressed Ben-Hur with a feeling of awe, besides which the blessing included in the answering salutation had been partly addressed to him. And while that part was being spoken, the eyes of the aged guest, hollowed yet luminous, rested upon his face long enough to stir an emotion new and mysterious, and so strong that he again and again during the repast scanned the much wrinkled and bloodless face for its meaning. But always there was the expression, bland, placid, and trustful as a child's. A little later he found that expression habitual. "This is he, O Balthasar," said the sheik, laying his hand on Ben-Hur's arm, "who will break bread with us this evening." The Egyptian glanced at the young man and looked again, surprised and doubting, seeing which the sheik continued, "I have promised him my horses for trial tomorrow, and if all goes well he will drive them in the circus." Balthasar continued his gaze. "He came well recommended," Ilderim pursued, much puzzled. "You may know him as the son of Arius, who was a noble Roman sailor, though—" The sheik hesitated, then resumed with a laugh, "though he declares himself an Israelite of the tribe of Judah, and by the splendor of God I believe that he tells me." Balthasar could no longer withhold explanation. "Today, O most glorious sheik, my life was in peril, and would have been lost had not a youth, the counterpart of this one, if indeed he be not the very same, intervened when all others fled, and saved me." Then he addressed Ben-Hur directly. "Art thou not he?" "I cannot answer so far," Ben-Hur replied with modest deference. "I am he who stopped the horses of the insolent Roman when they were rushing upon thy camel at the fountain of Castalia. Thy daughter left a cup with me." From the bosom of his tunic, he produced the cup and gave it to Balthasar. A glow lighted the faded countenance of the Egyptian. "The Lord sent thee to me at the fountain today," he said in a tremulous voice, stretching his hand towards Ben-Hur, "and he sends thee to me now. I give him thanks and praise him thou, for of his favor I have wherewith to give thee great reward, and I will. The cup is thine, keep it." Ben-Hur took back the gift, and Balthasar, seeing the inquiry upon Ilderim's face, related the occurrence at the fountain. "What?" said the sheik to Ben-Hur. "Thou saidst nothing of this to me, when better recommendation thou couldst not have brought? Am I not an Arab and sheik of my tribe of tens of thousands? And is not he my guest? And is not in my guest bond that the good or evil thou dost him is good or evil done to me? Whither shouldst thou go for reward but here? And whose the hand to give it but mine?" His voice at the end of this speech rose to cutting shrillness. "Good sheik, spare me, I pray. I came not for reward, great or small, and that I may be acquitted of the thought. I say the help I gave this excellent man would have been given as well to thy humblest servant. But he is my friend, my guest, not my servant, and seest thou not in the difference the favor of fortune?" Then to Balthasar the sheik subjoined, "Ah, by the splendor of God, I tell thee again, he is not a Roman." With that he turned away and gave attention to the servants, whose preparations for the supper were about complete. The reader who recollects the history of Balthasar, as given by himself at the meeting in the desert, will understand the effect of Ben-Hur's assertion of disinterestedness upon that unworthy. In his devotion to men there has been, it will be remembered, no distinctions, while the redemption which had been promised him in the way of reward, the redemption for which he was waiting, was universal. To him, therefore, the assertion sounded somewhat like an echo of himself. He took a step nearer Ben-Hur and spoke to him in a childlike way. "How did the sheik say I should call you? It was a Roman name, I think." "Arius, the son of Arius." "Yet thou art not a Roman?" "All my people were Jews." "Were, saidst thou? Are they not living?" The question was subtle as well as simple, but Ilderim saved Ben-Hur from reply. "Come," he said to them, "the meal is ready." Ben-Hur gave his arm to Balthasar and conducted him to the table, where shortly they were all seated on their rugs, Eastern fashion. The lavers were brought them, and they washed and dried their hands. Then the sheik made a sign, the servants stopped, and the voice of the Egyptian arose tremulous with holy feeling. "Father of all, God, what we have is of thee. Take our thanks and bless us, that we may continue to do thy will." It was the grace of the good man. It was the grace the good man had said simultaneously with his brethren Gaspar the Greek and Melchior the Hindu, the utterance in diverse tongues out of which had come the miracle attesting the divine presence at the meal in the desert years before. The table to which they immediately addressed themselves was, as may be thought, rich in the substantials and delicacies favorite in the East, in cakes hot from the oven, vegetables from the gardens, meat singly, compounds of meats and vegetables, milk of kine and honey and butter, all eaten or drunk, it should be remarked, without any of the modern accessories, knives, forks, spoons, cups, or plates, and in this part of the repast but little was said, for they were hungry. But when the dessert was in course, it was otherwise. They laved their hands again, had the lap cloths shaken out, and with a renewed table and the sharp edge of their appetites gone, they were disposed to talk and listen. With such a company, an Arab, a Jew, and an Egyptian, all believers alike in one God, there could be at that age but one subject of conversation, and of the three which should be speaker, but he to whom the deity had been so nearly a personal appearance, who had seen him in a star, had heard his voice in direction, had been led so far and so miraculously by his spirit, and of what should he talk but that of which he had been called to testify? Chapter 15. Balthasar impresses Ben-Hur. The shadows cast over the orchard of palms by the mountains at set of sun left no sweet margin time of violet sky and drowsing earth between the day and the night. The latter came early and swift, and against its glooming in the tent this evening the servants brought 4 candlesticks of brass and set them by the corners of the table. To each candlestick there were 4 branches, and on each branch a lighted silver lamp and a supply cup of olive oil. In light, ample, even brilliant, the group at desert continued their conversation, speaking in the Syriac dialect, familiar to all peoples in that part of the world. The Egyptian told his story of the meeting of the 3 in the desert, and agreed with the sheik that it was in December, 27 years before, when he and his companions, fleeing from Herod, arrived at the tent praying shelter. The narrative was heard with intense interest, even the servants lingering when they could to catch its details. Ben-Hur received it as became a man listening to a revelation of deep concern to all humanity, and to none of more concern than the people of Israel. In his mind, as we shall presently see, there was crystallizing an idea which was to change his course of life, if not absorb it completely, or absolutely, same difference. As the recital proceeded, the impression made by Balthasar upon the young Jew increased. At its conclusion, his feeling was too profound to permit a doubt of its truth. Indeed, there was nothing left him desirable in the connection but assurances, if such were to be had, pertaining exclusively to the consequences of the amazing event. The horse and chariots verses in Psalm 146, I think. Super. Great. Thank you. And now, ADD moment. And now there is wanting an explanation which the very discerning may have heretofore demanded. Certainly it can be no longer delayed. Our tale begins in point of date not less than fact to trench close upon the opening of the ministry of the Son of Mary, whom we have seen but once since the same Balthasar left him worshipfully in his mother's lap in the cave by Bethlehem. Henceforth, to the end, the mysterious child will be a subject of continual reference, and slowly, though surely, the current of events with which we are dealing will bring us nearer and nearer to him until finally we see him a man. We would like, if armed contrariety of opinion would permit it, to add, a man whom the world could not do without. Of this declaration, apparently so simple, a shrewd mind inspired by faith will make much, and in welcome. Before his time and since there have been men indispensable to particular people and periods, but his indispensability was to the whole race, and for all time, a respect in which it is unique, solitary, divine. To Sheik Ilderim the story was not new. He had heard it from the three wise men together under circumstances which left no room for doubt. He had acted upon it seriously, for the helping of a fugitive escape from the anger of the first Herod was dangerous. Now one of the three sat at his table again, a welcome guest and revered friend. Sheik Ilderim certainly believed the story, yet, in the nature of things, its mighty central fact could not come home to him with the force and absorbing effect it came to Ben-Hur. He was an Arab, whose interest in the consequences was but general. On the other hand, Ben-Hur was an Israelite and a Jew, with more than a special interest in, if the solecism can be pardoned, the truth of the fact. He laid hold of the circumstance with a purely Jewish mind. From his cradle, let it be remembered, he had heard of the Messiah. At the colleges he had been made familiar with all that was known of the being at once the hope, the fear, and the peculiar glory of the chosen people. The prophets, from the first to the last of the heroic line, foretold him, and the coming had been, and yet was, the theme of endless exposition with the rabbis. In the synagogues, in the schools, in the temple, of fast days and feast days, in public and in private, in national teachers expounded and kept expounding until all the children of Abraham, wherever their lots were cast, bore the Messiah in expectation, and by it literally and with iron severity ruled and molded their lives. Doubtless it will be understood from this that there was much argument among the Jews themselves about the Messiah. And so there was, but the disputation was all limited to one point, and only one: when would he come? Disquisition is for the preacher, whereas the writer is but telling a tale, and that he may not lose his character, the explanation he is making requires notice merely of a point connected with the Messiah, about which the unanimity among the chosen people was matter of marvelous astonishment. He was to be, when come, the King of the Jews. their political king, their Caesar. By their instrumentality he was to make armed conquest of the earth, and then for the profit, and in the name of God, hold it down forever. On this faith, dear reader, the Pharisees, or separatists in the latter being rather a political term, in the cloisters and around the altars of the temple, built an edifice of hope far overtopping the dream of the Macedonian. His but covered the earth, theirs covered the earth and filled the skies. That is to say, in their bold, boundless fantasy of blasphemous egotism, God the Almighty was in effect to suffer them for their uses, to nail him by the ear to a door in sign of eternal servitude. Returning directly to Ben-Hur, it is to be observed now that there were two circumstances in his life, the result of which had been to keep him in a state comparatively free from the influence and hard effects of the audacious faith of his separatist countrymen. In the first place, his father followed the faith of the Sadducees, who may, in a general way, be termed the liberals of their time. They had some loose opinions in denial of their soul. They were strict constructionists and rigorous observers of the law, as found in the books of Moses, but they held the vast mass of rabbinical addenda to those books in derisive contempt. They were unquestionably a sect, yet their religion was more a philosophy than a creed. They did not deny themselves the enjoyments of life, and saw many admirable methods and productions among the Gentile divisions of the race. In politics they were the active opposition of the separatists. In the natural order of things, these circumstances and conditions, opinions and peculiarities would have descended to the son as certainly and really as any portion of his father's estate, and as we have seen, he was actually in course of acquiring them when the second saving event overtook them. Upon a youth of Ben-Hur's mind and temperament, the influence of 5 years of affluent life in Rome can be appreciated best by recalling that the great city was then, in fact, the meeting place of the nations, their meeting place politically and commercially, as well as for the indulgence of pleasure without restraint. Round and round the golden milestone in front of the forum, now in gloom of eclipse, now in unapproachable splendor, flowed all the active currents of humanity. If excellences of manner, refinements of society, attainments of intellect, and glory of achievement made no impression upon him, how could he, as the son of Aries, pass day after day through a period so long from the beautiful villa near Misenum into the receptions of Caesar, and be wholly uninfluenced by what he saw there of kings, princes, ambassadors, hostages, and delegates, suitors of all of them from every known land, waiting humbly the yes or no which was to make or unmake them? As mere assemblages, to be sure, there was nothing to compare with the gatherings at Jerusalem in celebration of the Passover. Yet when he sat under the purple velaria of the Circus Maximus, one of 350,000 spectators, he must have been visited by the thought that possibly there might be some branches of the family of man worthy divine consideration, if not mercy, though they were of the uncircumcised, some by their sorrows, and yet worse by their hopelessness in the midst of sorrows, fitted for brotherhood in the promises to his countrymen. That he should have had such a thought under such circumstances was but natural. We think so much, at least, will be admitted. But when the reflection came to him, and he gave himself up to it, he could not have been blind to a certain distinction. The wretchedness of the masses and their hopeless condition had no relation whatever to religion. Their murmurs and groans were not against their gods or for want of gods. In the oak woods of Britain, the Druids held their followers, Odin and Freya, maintained their godships in Gaul and Germany, and among the Hyperboreans, Egypt was satisfied with her crocodiles and Anubis. The Persians were yet devoted to Orsmund and Ahriman. Ahriman, holding them in equal honor. In the hope of nirvana, the Hindus moved on patient and as ever in the rayless path of Brahm. The beautiful Greek in mind the pauses in pauses of philosophy still sang the heroic gods of Homer, while in Rome nothing was so common and cheap as gods. According to whim, the masters of the world, because they were masters, carried their worship and offerings indifferently from altar to altar, delighted in the pandemonium they had erected. Their discontent, if they were discontented, was with the number of gods, for, after borrowing all the divinities of the earth, they proceeded to deify their Caesars, and vote them altars and holy service. No, the unhappy condition was not from religion, but misgovernment and usurpations and countless tyrannies. The Avernus men had been tumbled into and were praying to be relieved from was terribly but essentially political. The supplication everywhere alike in Londonium, Alexandria, Athens, Jerusalem, was for a king to conquer with, not a god to worship. Studying this situation after 2,000 years, we can see and say that religiously there was no relief from the universal confusion, except some god could prove himself a true god and a masterful one and come to the rescue. But the people of the time, even the discerning and philosophical, discovered no hope except in crushing Rome. That done, the relief would follow in restorations and reorganizations. Therefore they prayed, conspired, rebelled, fought, and died, drenching the soil today with blood, tomorrow with tears, and always with the same result. It remains to be said now that Ben-Hur was in agreement with the mass of men of his time, not Romans. The 5 years' residence in the capital served him with opportunity to see and study the miseries of the subjugated world, and in full belief that the evils which afflicted it were political, and to be cured only by the sword. He was going forth to fit himself for a part in the day of resort to the heroic remedy. By practice of arms he was a perfect soldier, but war has its higher fields, and he who would move successfully in them must know more than to defend with shield and thrust with spear. In those fields the general finds his tasks, the greatest of which is the reduction of the many into one, and that one himself, the consummate captain, is a fighting man armed with an army. This conception entered into the scheme of life, to which he was further swayed by the reflection that the vengeance he dreamt of in connection with his individual wrongs would be more surely found in some of the ways of war than in any pursuit of peace. The feelings with which he listened to Balthasar can be now understood. The story touched two of the most sensitive points of his being, so they rang within him. His heart beat fast, and faster still when, searching himself, he found not a doubt either that the recital was true in every particular, or that the child so miraculously found was the Messiah, marveling much that Israel rested so dead to the revelation, and that he had never heard of it before that day. Two questions presented themselves to him as centering all it was at that moment further desirable to know. Where was the child then? And what was his mission? With apologies for the interruptions, he proceeded to draw out the opinions of Balthasar, who was in no wise loath to speak. Chapter 16. Christ is coming. Balthasar. There's like a million different things that I thought of to say while I was reading that, but I will save that commentary for later, and let's go on to chapter 16, if I may. All right, chapter 16. "If I could answer you," Balthasar said in his simple, earnest, devout way, "oh, if I knew where he is, how quickly I would go to him. The seas should not stay me, nor the mountains." "You have tried to find him, then?" asked Ben-Hur. A smile flitted across the face of the Egyptian. "The first task I charged myself with after leaving the shelter given me in the desert," Balthasar cast a grateful look at Ilderim, was to learn what became of the child. But a year had passed, and I dared not go up to Judea in person, for Herod still held the throne, bloody mingled as ever. In Egypt, upon my return, there were a few friends to believe the wonderful things I told them of what I had seen and heard, a few who rejoiced with me that a Redeemer was born, a few who never tired of the story. Some of them came up for me, looking after the child. They went first to Bethlehem, and found there the khan and the cave. But the steward, he who sat at the gate the night of the birth, and the night we came following the star, was gone. The king had taken him away, and he was no more seen." "But they found some proofs, surely," said Ben-Hur eagerly. "Yes, proofs written in blood, a village in mourning, mothers yet crying for their little ones. You must know, when Herod heard of our flight, he sent down and slew the youngest born of the children of Bethlehem. Not one escaped. The faith of my messengers was confirmed, but they came to me, saying the child was dead, slain with the other innocents." "Dead?" exclaimed Ben-Hur, aghast. "Dead, sayest thou?" "Nay, my son, I did not say so. I said they, my messengers, told me the Christ child was dead. I did not believe the report then. I do not believe it now." "I see. Thou hast some special knowledge?" Not so, said Balthasar, dropping his gaze. "The Spirit was to go with us no farther than to the child. When we came out of the cave, we looked first thing for the star, but it was gone, and we knew we were left to ourselves. The last inspiration of the Holy One, the last I can recall, was that which sent us to Ilderim for safety." "Yes," said the sheik, fingering his beard nervously. "You told me. You were sent to me by a spirit. I remember it." "I have no special knowledge," Balthasar continued, observing the dejection which had fallen upon Ben-Hur. "But, my son, I have given the matter much thought continuing through years, inspired by faith, which I assure you, calling God for witness, is as strong in me now as in the hour I heard the voice of the Spirit calling me by the shore of the lake. If you will listen, I will tell you why I believe the child is living." Both Ilderim and Ben-Hur looked assent, and appeared to summon their faculties that they might understand as well as hear. The interest reached the servants, who drew near to the divan and stood listening. Throughout the tent there was the profoundest silence. "We three believe in God." Balthasar bowed his head as he spoke. "And he is the truth," he resumed. "His word is God. The hills may turn to dust, and the seas may be drunk dry by south winds, but his word shall stand, because it is the truth." The utterance was in a manner inexpressibly solemn. The voice which was his, speaking to me by the lake, said, "Blessed art thou, O son of Mizraim. The redemption cometh. With two others from the remotenesses of the earth thou shalt see the Saviour. I have seen the Saviour, blessed be his name. But the redemption, which was the second part of the promise, is yet to come. Seest thou now? If the child be dead, there is no agent to bring the redemption about, and the word is not, and God, nay, I dare not say it." He threw up both hands in horror. The redemption was the work for which the child was born, and so long as the promise abides, not even death can separate him from his work until it is fulfilled, or at least in the way of fulfillment. Take you that now as one reason for my belief, then give me further attention. The good man paused. "Wilt thou not taste the wine? "It is at thy hand, see," said Ilderim respectfully. Balthasar drank, and, seemingly refreshed, continued. "The Saviour I saw was born of woman, in nature like us, and subject to all our ills, even death. Let that stand as the first proposition. Consider next the work set apart to him. Was it not a performance for which only a man is fitted, a man wise, firm, discreet, a man, not a child? To become such, he had to grow as we grow. Bethink you now of the dangers his life was subject to in the interval, the long interval between childhood and maturity. The existing powers were his enemies. Herod was his enemy, and what would Rome have been? And as for Israel, that he should not be accepted by Israel was the motive for cutting him off. See you now? What better way was there to take care of his life in the helpless growing time than by passing him into obscurity? Wherefore I say to myself and to my listening faith, which is never moved except by yearning of love, I say he is not dead, but lost, and his work remaining undone, he will come again. There you have the reasons for my belief. Are they not good?" Ilderim's small Arab eyes were bright with understanding, and Ben-Hur, lifted from his dejection, said heartily, "I at least may not gainsay them. What further, pray?" "Hast thou not enough, my son? Well," he began in calmer tone, "seeing that the reasons were good, more plainly, seeing it was God's will that the child should not be found, I settled my faith into the keeping of patience, and took to waiting." He raised his eyes, full of holy trust, and broke off abstractedly. "I am waiting now. He lives, keeping well his mighty secret. What though I cannot go to him, or name the hill or the vale of his abiding place? He lives. It may be as the fruit in blossom, it may be as the fruit just ripening, but by the certainty there is in the promise and reason of God, I know he lives." A thrill of awe struck Ben-Hur, a thrill which was but the dying of his half-formed doubt. "Where thinkest thou he is?" he asked in a low voice, and hesitating like one who feels upon his lips the pressure of a sacred silence. Balthasar looked at him kindly and replied, his mind not entirely freed from abstraction, "In my house on the Nile, so close to the river that the passer-by in boats see it, and its reflection in the water at the same time. In my house a few weeks ago I sat thinking. A man 30 years old, I said to myself, should have his fields of life all ploughed and his planting well done, for after that it is summer-time, with space scarce enough to ripen his sowing. The child, I said further, is now 27. His time to plant must be at hand. I asked myself, as you here asked me, my son, and answered by coming hither, as to a good resting place close by the land thy fathers had from God. Where else should he appear, if not in Judea? In what city should he begin his work, if not in Jerusalem? Who should be first to receive the blessings he is to bring, if not the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, in love at least, the children of the Lord? If I were bidden go seek him, I would search well the hamlets and villages on the slopes of the mountains of Judea and Galilee, falling on eastwardly into the valley of the Jordan. He is there now, standing in a door or on a hilltop. Only this evening he saw the sun set one day nearer, the time when he himself shall become the light of the world. Balthasar ceased, with his hands raised and finger pointing as if at Judea. All the listeners, even the dull servants outside the divan, affected by his fervor, were startled as if by a majestic presence suddenly apparent within the tent. Nor did the sensation die away at once. Of those at the table, each sat a while thinking. The spell was finally broken by Ben-Hur. "I see, good Balthasar," he said, "that thou hast been much and strangely favored. I see also that thou art a wise man indeed. It is not in my power to tell how grateful I am for the things thou hast told me. I am warned of the coming of great events, and borrow somewhat from thy faith. Complete the obligation, I pray thee, by telling further of the mission of him for whom thou art waiting, and for whom from this night I too shall wait, as becomes a believing son of Judah. He is to be a Saviour, thou saidst. Is he not to be King of the Jews also?" "My son," said Balthasar in his benignant way, "the mission is yet a purpose in the bosom of God. All I think about is its wrung from the words of the voice in connection with the prayer to which they were in answer. Shall we refer to them again? Thou art the teacher. The cause of my disquiet," Balthasar began calmly, "that which made me a preacher in Alexandria and in the villages of the Nile, that which drove me at last into the solitude where the Spirit found me, was the fallen condition of men, occasioned, as I believed, by loss of the knowledge of God. I sorrowed for the sorrows of my kind, not of one class, but all of them. So utterly were they fallen, it seemed to me there could be no redemption, unless God himself would make it his work. And I prayed him to come, and that I might see him. Thy good works have conquered. The redemption cometh. Thou shalt see the Saviour. Thus the voice spake, and with the answer I went up to Jerusalem rejoicing. Now to whom is the redemption? To all the world. And how shall it be? Strengthen thy faith, my son. Men say, I know, that there will be no happiness until Rome is razed from her hills. That is to say, the ills of the time are not, as I thought them, from the ignorance of God, but from the misgovernment of rulers. Do we need to be told that human governments are never for the sake of religion? How many kings have you heard of who were better than their subjects? Oh, no, no. The redemption cannot be for a political purpose, to pull down rulers and powers and vacate their places, merely that others may take and enjoy them. If that were all of it, the wisdom of God would cease to be surpassing. I tell you, though, it will be but the saying of blind to blind. He that comes is to be a Saviour of souls, and the redemption means God once more on earth, and righteousness, that his stay here may be tolerable to himself. Disappointment showed plainly on Ben-Hur's face. His head dropped, and if he was not convinced, he yet felt himself incapable that moment of disputing the opinion of the Egyptian. Not so Ilderim. By the splendor of God, he cried impulsively, the judgment does away with all custom. The ways of the world are fixed and cannot be changed. There must be a leader in every community clothed with power, else there is no reform. Balthasar received the burst gravely. Thy wisdom, good sheik, is of the world, and thou dost forget that it is from the ways of the world we are to be redeemed. Man, as a subject, is the ambition of a king. The soul of a man, for its salvation, is the desire of a god. Ilderim, though silent, shook his head, unwilling to believe. Ben-Hur took the argument for him. Father, I call thee such by permission, he said. For whom wert thou required to ask at the gates of Jerusalem? The sheik threw him a grateful look. I was to ask of the people, said Balthasar quietly, where is he that is born king of the Jews? And you saw him at the cave by Bethlehem. We saw and worshipped him, and gave him presents, Melchior gold, Gaspar frankincense, and I myrrh. When thou dost speak of fact, O Father, to hear thee is to believe, said Ben-Hur. But in the matter of opinion, I cannot understand the kind of king thou wouldst make of the child. I cannot separate the ruler from his power and duties. "Son," said Balthasar, "we have the habit of studying closely the things which chance to lie at our feet, giving but a look at the greater objects in the distance. Thou seest now but the title, King of the Jews. Wilt thou lift thine eyes to the mystery beyond it, the stumbling block will disappear. Of the title, a word. Thy Israel hath seen better days, days in which God called thy people endearingly his people, and dealt with them through prophets. Now, in those days, he promised them a Savior I saw, promised him as King of the Jews. The appearance must be according to the promise, if only for the word's sake. Ah, thou seest the reason of my question at the gate. Thou seest, and I will no more of it, but pass on. It may be next. Thou art regarding the dignity of the child. If so, bethink thee, what is it to be successor of Herod? By the world's standard of honor? What? Could not God better by his beloved? If thou canst think of the Almighty Father in want of a title, and stooping to borrow the inventions of men, why was I not bidden to ask for a Caesar at once? Oh, for the substance of that whereof we speak, look higher, I pray thee, ask rather of what he whom we await shall be king. For I do tell, my son, that is the key to the mystery, which no man shall understand without the key. Balthasar raised his eyes devoutly. There is a kingdom on the earth, though it is not of it. A kingdom of wider bounds than the earth, wider than the sea and the earth, though they were rolled together as finest gold and spread by the beating of hammers. Its existence is a fact, as our hearts are facts, and we journey through it from birth to death without seeing it, nor shall any man see it until he hath first known his own soul. For the kingdom is not for him, but for his soul, and in its dominion there is glory such as hath not entered imagination, original, incomparable, impossible of increase. What thou sayest, father, is a riddle to me, said Ben-Hur. I never heard of such a kingdom. Nor did I, said Ilderim. And I may not tell more of it, Balthasar added, humbly dropping his eyes. What it is for, how it may be reached, none can know until the child comes to take possession of it as his own. He brings the key of the viewless gate, which he will open for his beloved, among whom will be all who love him, for of such only the redeemed will be. After that there was a long silence, which Balthasar accepted as the end of the conversation. Good sheik, he said in his placid way, tomorrow or the next day I will go up to the city for a time. My daughter wishes to see the preparations for the games. I will speak further about the time of our going, and my son, I will see you again. To you both, peace and good night. They all arose from the table. The sheik and Ben-Hur remained looking after the Egyptian until he was conducted out of the tent. Sheik Ilderim, said Ben-Hur then, I have heard strange things tonight. Give me leave, I pray, to walk by the lake, that I may think of them. Go, and I will come after you. They washed their hands again, after which, at a sign from the master, a servant brought Ben-Hur his shoes, and directly he went out. Chapter 17, the title is The Kingdom, Spiritual or Political, and the first word is up. And I thought it was 3 pages, but it's actually 5. So, and that will end book 4. So at the end of that, we have book 5. So who votes that we read chapter 17? I know it's stretching it, making it a little long tonight. But we did start early on purpose so that we could go a little long tonight. Who? Yep. So Mom says I thought we wanted to finish book 4. Kimmy? She says it's okay with me. Who's enjoying the story so far? Give me a thumbs up or a heart if you're enjoying the story so far on your device, whatever you're watching it. Oh, Granny Bear says yes, please. This is a really good section, isn't it? Lots of good thoughts going on in here. Okay, so here's chapter 17, the kingdom, spiritual or political. Up a little way from the Dowar there was a cluster of palms which threw its shade half in the water, half on the land. A bulbul sang from the branches a song of invitation. A bulbul must be some kind of a bird. Ben-Hur stopped beneath to listen. At any other time the notes of the bird would have driven thought away, but the story of the Egyptian was a burden of wonder, and he was a laborer carrying it. And, like other laborers, there was to him no music in the sweetest music until mind and body were happily attuned by rest. The night was quiet. Not a ripple broke upon the shore. The old stars of the east were all out, each in its accustomed place, and there was summer everywhere, on land, on lake, in the sky. Ben-Hur's imagination was heated, his feelings aroused, his will all unsettled. So the palms, the sky, the air seemed to him of the far south zone into which Balthasar had been driven by despair for men. The lake with its motionless surface was a suggestion of the Nilotic mother by which the good man stood praying when the spirit made its radiant appearance. I think Nilotic is reference to the Nile, I think. Had all these accessories of the miracle come to Ben-Hur, or had he been transferred to them? And what if the miracle should be repeated, and to him? He feared, yet wished, and even waited for the vision. When at last his feverish mood was cooled, permitting him to become himself, he was able to think. His scheme of life has been explained. In all reflection about it heretofore, there had been one hiatus which he had not been able to bridge or fill up, one so broad he could see but vaguely to the other side of it. When finally he was graduated a captain as well as a soldier, to what object should he address his efforts? Revolution, he contemplated, of course, but the process of revolution have always been the same, and to lead men into them there have always been required first a cause or pretense to enlist adherents, second an end or something as a practical achievement. As a rule, he fights well who has wrongs to redress, but vastly better fights he who, with wrongs as a spur, has also steadily before him a glorious result in prospect, a result in which he can discern balm for wounds, compensation for valor, remembrance, and gratitude in the event of death. It sounds like the bronze bow all over again. To determine the sufficiency of either the cause or the end, it was needful that Ben-Hur should study the adherents to whom he looked when all was ready for action. Very naturally, they were his countrymen. The wrongs of Israel were to every son of Abraham, and each one was a cause vastly holy, vastly inspiring. Aye, the cause was there, but the end, what should it be? The hours and days he had given this branch of his scheme were past calculation, all with the same conclusion. A dim, uncertain general idea of national liberty. Was it sufficient? He could not say no, for that would have been the death of his hope. He shrank from saying yes, because his judgment taught him better. He could not assure himself even that Israel was able to single-handedly to successfully combat Rome. He knew the resources of that great enemy. He knew her art was superior to her resources. A universal alliance might suffice, but alas, that was impossible, except, and upon the exception, how long and earnestly he had dwelt, except a hero would come from one of the suffering nations, and by martial successes accomplish a renown to fill the whole earth. what glory to Judea could she prove the Macedonia or the new Alexander? Alas, again, under the rabbis valor was possible, but not discipline. And then the taunt of Messala in the garden of Herod, all you conquer in the 6 days, you lose on the 7th. So it happened, he never approached the chasm, thinking to surmount it, but he was beaten back. And so incessantly had he failed in the object, that he had about given it over, except as a thing of chance. Are we good? Oh, Kim, I think my music's on downstairs. Can you turn it off? I'm sorry, that distracted me. So it happened, he never approached the chasm, thinking to surmount it, but he was beaten back. And so incessantly had he failed in the object, that he had about given it over, except as a thing of chance. The hero might be discovered in his day, or he might not. God only knew. Such his state of mind, there need be no lingering upon the effect of Malak's skeleton recital of the story of Balthasar. He heard it with a bewildering satisfaction, a feeling that here was the solution of the trouble. Here was the requisite hero found at last, and he, a son of the lion tribe, and king of the Jews. Behind the hero, lo, the world in arms. The king implied a kingdom. He was to be a warrior, glorious as David, a ruler, wise and magnificent as Solomon. The kingdom was to be a power against which Rome was to dash itself to pieces. There would be colossal war, and the agonies of death and birth. Then peace, meaning, of course, Judean domination forever. It actually says dominion. I said it wrong. Ben-Hur's heart beat hard, as for an instant he had a vision of Jerusalem, the capital of the world, and Zion, the site of the throne of the universal master. It seemed to the enthusiast rare fortune that the man who had seen the king was at the tent to which he was going. He could see him there and hear him and learn of him what all he knew of the coming change, especially all he knew of the time of its happening. If it were at hand, the campaign with Maxentius should be abandoned, and he would go and set about organizing and arming the tribes, that Israel might be ready when the great day of the restoration began to break. Now, as we have seen from Balthasar himself, Ben-Hur had the marvelous story. Was he satisfied? There was a shadow upon him deeper than that of the cluster of palms, the shadow of a great uncertainty which, take note, O reader, which pertained more to the kingdom than the king. What of this kingdom, and what is it to be? Ben-Hur asked himself in thought. Thus early arose the questions which were to follow the child to his end, and survive him on earth. Incomprehensible in his day, a dispute in this, an enigma to all who do not or cannot understand that every man is two in one, a deathless soul and a mortal body. What is it to be? He asked. For us, O reader, the child himself has answered, but for Ben-Hur there were only the words of Balthasar, on the earth yet not of it. Not for men, but for their souls, a dominion, nevertheless, of unimaginable glory. What wonder the hapless youth found the phrases but the darkening of a riddle. The hand of man is not in it, he said despairingly, nor has the king of such a kingdom use for men, neither toilers, nor consulars, nor soldiers. The earth must die, or be made anew, and for government new principles must be discovered, something besides armed hands, something in place of force. But what? Again, O reader, that which we will not see, he could not. The power there is in love, had not yet occurred to any man, much less had one come saying directly that for government and its objects, peace and order, love is better and mightier than force. In the midst of his reverie, a hand was laid upon his shoulder. "I have a word to say, O son of Ares," said Ilderim, stopping by his side. "A word, and then I must return, for the night is going." "I give you welcome, Sheik. As to the things you have heard but now," said Ilderim, almost without pause, "take in belief all save that relating to the kind of kingdom the child will set up when he comes. As to so much, keep virgin mind until you hear Simonides the merchant, a good man here in Antioch, to whom I will make you known. The Egyptian gives you coinage of his dreams, which are too good for the earth. Simonides is wiser. He will bring you the sayings of your prophets, giving book and page, so you cannot deny that the child will be king of the Jews. In fact, I, by the splendor of God, a king as Herod was, only better and far more magnificent. And then, see you, we will taste the sweetness of vengeance. I have said, peace to you." "Stay, Sheik." If Ilderim heard his call, he did not stay. "Simonides again," said Ben-Hur bitterly. "Simonides here, Simonides there, from this one now and from that, then from that. I am like to be well ridden of by my father's servant. Who knows at least to hold fast that which is mine? Wherefore he is richer, if indeed he be not wiser than the Egyptian. By the covenant, it is not to the faithless a man should go and find a faith to keep, and I will not. But hark, singing, and the voice of a woman's or an angel's. It comes this way." Down the lake toward the Dowar came a woman singing. Her voice floated along the hushed water, melodious as a flute, and louder, growing each instant. Directly the dipping of oars was heard in slow measure. A little later the words were distinguishable, words in purest Greek, best fitted of all the tongues of the day for the expression of passionate grief. The lament Egyptian. "I sigh as I sing for the story land across the Syrian sea. The odorous winds from the musky sand were breaths of life to me. They play with the plumes of the whispering palm, for me, alas, no more. Nor more does the Nile in the moonlit calm moan past the Memphian shore. O Nilus, thou god of my fainting soul, in dreams thou comest to me. And dreaming I play with the lotus bowl, and sing old songs to thee, and hear from afar the Memnonian strain, and calls from dear Symbol, and wake to a passion of grief and pain, that ere I said farewell." At the conclusion of the song, the singer was past the cluster of palms. The last word, farewell, floated past Ben-Hur, weighted with all the sweet sorrow of parting. The passing of the boat was as the passing of a deeper shadow into the deeper night. Ben-Hur drew a long breath, hardly distinguishable from a sigh. "I know her by the song, the daughter of Balthasar. How beautiful it was, and how beautiful is she!" He recalled her large eyes, curtained slightly by the drooping lids, the cheeks oval and rosy rich, the lips full and deep with dimpling in the corners, and all the grace of the tall, lithe figure. "How beautiful she is," he replied, and his heart made answer by the quickening of its movement. Then, almost the same instant, another face, younger and quite as beautiful, more childlike and tender, if not so passionate, appeared as if held up to him out of the lake. "Esther," he said, smiling, "as I wished, a star has been sent to me." He turned and passed slowly back to the tent. His life had been crowded with griefs and with vengeful preparations. Too much crowded for love. Was this the beginning of a happy change? And if the influence went with him into the tent, whose was it? Esther had given him a cup. So had the Egyptian. And both had come to him at the same time under the palms. Which? That's the end of book 4. And tomorrow we will likely not be meeting because I will be driving for most of the day. And we will see if we can begin book 5 on Friday. On whatever the day after tomorrow is, Tuesday. I am completely mixed-matched in my days of the week at this point, but I know today is Sunday. Our church did not meet today, so we didn't think of it as a Sunday. We thought of it as another day, and so it was a little distracting for us. Anyhow, I hope that you're enjoying Ben-Hur. We are about halfway through now, finally, this book. Here's if you look at it this way, and we're on page 279 out of, I think it's 550-ish pages. So that is right at about halfway, a little more. So I hope you're enjoying the book. I know I am. Let me know in the comments, and I will see you next time. God bless you.